Okay, folks, and in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and get us started for today. Thank you so much for joining us for this special career event with the National Consortium for Data Science, aka NCDS. My name is Amanda Miller, and I'm the Associate Director for the NCDS. Before we begin, I'm going to share a few housekeeping items. Now we have disabled Zoom Q&A for attendees. Chat is also disabled for this webinar to allow Trey to present without distractions. But don't worry, we do offer a place for you to share your comments and questions. All questions and comments should be uploaded to Easy Retro, which is our crowdsourcing Q&A platform. We'll go ahead and share the link with all of you in the Zoom chat now, and we'll share instructions on how to use the link before we begin the Q&A. It's a pretty user-friendly tool, so if you figure out how to use it, please feel free to go ahead and add questions while Trey is speaking. So, tonight's speaker is particularly exciting for me because my career also began at the nation's cultural center, the John F. Kennedy for the Performing Arts. Trés McMichael's career path has taken some planned and some unexpected turns since completing his undergraduate education at Elon University in North Carolina in 2019. As the Senior Program Manager for Social Impact Civic Alliances, Trey combines his experience in data science with his passion for social justice to build stronger communities across the country. I am so excited for us to learn from his experiences now. Please join me in welcoming Trés McMichael.
Thank you, Amanda. And hey, everybody. It is so good to be here. I am so glad to be presenting to you all today. Thank you for tuning in on just like a Wednesday evening. There are so many other things going on in the world, but this work is incredibly important and I'm very passionate about it. And so thanks for just hearing me talk a little bit about the work that I do at the Kennedy Center and kind of how I got to be here and do this thing. I'm going to share my screen and take you through a little bit of my journey, a little bit of some of the authors and folks who I really admire in terms of the work that they do that's inspired what I've been able to do since graduating and the work that I've been able to do at the Kennedy Center. So to start off, I like to start with positionality and my background, right? And so I appreciate Amanda saying that biography about kind of who I am and where I am in the world. But there's a lot in there that I think is important just to note and name, right? So I am currently living in Washington, D.C., a very interesting place to be right now and for the next couple of months, as it is always. But I'm originally from Baltimore, Maryland. I grew up right outside of Baltimore in a neighborhood called Pikesville, where I studied the arts really my entire life. The arts and kind of community work have always been intertwined from my experience. I tell people often about my experience quitting my dad's basketball team. My dad was a basketball coach, and I was very, very bad at basketball. And my dad, because it was Tuesday, and you know how parents they've got a bunch of kids, got to drive around town. So my dad told me, "Well, you have to keep coming to basketball practice with me." And at the community center, there was a jazz band that would practice in the room next to the basketball court. And I had started playing the saxophone, and my dad was like, "Well, you should just bring your saxophone and play with this like local jazz band." And the jazz band was, mostly older, mostly Black and Hispanic men and women who just came together once a week to play music. And that experience of, okay, here are people in my community coming together, not necessarily because they're recording an album, not necessarily because they're, trying to put on a huge show, but just to experience music and community together and how all of so much of I've learned about arts and so much of what I've learned about really community change came from that experience, as well as other experiences I've had growing up. My parents were balloon artists. My grandparents owned a bus travel agency, so I got to travel the country a lot and see the world kind of through their eyes. I come from a background of farmers and rodeos, and so all of those experiences have contributed to who I am and how I think about community change, how I think about the arts and the humanities. I want to show up that I do work here as a Black queer man, as having a Black queer body, one that has experienced both the deep joys and labored hardships that accompany having those bodies and those identities as a home. A body that has been touched by both the violence and homophobia, racism, as well as the privileges as being a cisgendered male with multiple college degrees employed by a large well-known arts institution with English as my primary speaking language. This positionality shows up in the authors that I've engaged with through my research, who are largely Black, Indigenous, and queer. And I just think it is important to name how I enter into the work and the fullness of the story of who I am, just to give you some background. I'll also share that yes, I went to Elon University in North Carolina. I loved my experience at Elon. I graduated in 2019, and I'm so appreciative of my journey there. And I'll talk a little about that later as well. So one of the things I wanted to start off with is one of the grounding texts that I discovered in some of my research in undergrad when I was at the musical theater program working on something called a Common Good project that I'll talk about in a second. But the quote is Black theater practitioners must not only have the authority over the representational apparatus, but must use theater as a means of protest and revolt in order to change Black lives and fight oppressive conditions. So what Henry Alam is saying here is that for many Black theater artists, arts administrators, creatives, specifically thinking about theater here, though, is that theater can't just be theater for theater. How is theater really used as a tool to change the conditions of Black people? How is theater used as a tool to lead us to justice, to lead us to belonging, to lead us to community care? How are we using theater as a tool to fight oppressive conditions that have plagued, specifically here, Black communities for decades, for generations in this country? And so this text for me really stood out, has followed me through my undergraduate and graduate career because of just the call of we must use the authority of the representational apparatus. How are we using our bodies? How are we using our words? How are we using theater as a tool? And that work for me in a way translated to data science, translated to research, translated to, oh, how are we using theater as a tool to tell our stories, to collect data? For me, working in arts institutions, really my entire career, a lot of what we do is very, what people may say like woo woo, lots of feelings. When I was growing up in theater school, we talked a lot about how, theater is the reality of doing. And so that is what people imagine the arts are. That is what people imagine performing is. When an actor comes on stage, it is the reality of doing something different. And so for us as data scientists, as people who work in evaluation, as people who work in research, as people who work in the arts, thinking of that, the reality of what we're doing, for me, it was also connected to my work and the work I do in the arts. So a little bit of background of what I did at Elon. So Elon, I actually discovered kind of very randomly. As Amanda shared in the beginning, I am a singer. I'm a vocalist. I'm a musical theater background. And I had traveled to North Carolina for a vocal competition with an organization called NATS, which is the National Association of Teachers of Singing. And I was competing in the classical music competition for high school seniors. I had won that competition, and one of the judges was a professor at Elon. And while I was there in Greensboro, he said, I teach at the school named Elon. It's up the street. If you have a minute to visit while you're here, you should take advantage of that. I think it's a really good school. I think it'd be a great fit. And I was down with my entire family. And so we said, okay, it's 30 minutes away. Let's see if we can organize a quick tour while we're here in Greensboro. I went to Elon. I showed up on campus. The first building that we saw was called the McMichael building. My last name is McMichael. My parents got out of the car. We all took a photo. Uh, but on the campus, I learned about all the opportunities, not only their renowned musical theater program, but some of the other ways to get plugged in with different Elon experiences. During my time at Elon, I was a double major, triple minor, which sounds insane, and it is. but I studied musical theater and arts administration as my majors, and then I minored in leadership studies, business administration, and African American studies. But all of those things really helped to create a full picture and full experience for what I wanted to do in the arts. That was again connecting that experience I had in middle school and in high school with that community jazz band of like, oh, there are many things connected here to the arts. It's not just the arts itself, but it is leadership. It is running a nonprofit. It is just being on the stage. But there's so much more to that. I did not think that I would do any research in college at all. If you think of musical theater students, we are often in plays, rehearsing, 8 a.m. dance class, sometimes a 10 p.m. late night rehearsal with our scene partner. And research didn't necessarily fit into that until I spoke with my professor, Dr. LA, at Elon. And she said, well, I think that there is a way for research to fit into your story. I came into research from a place of being unseen on campus. Elon is a predominantly white institution. There were very, very few Black, queer, male students on campus. And I was having a pretty hard time vocalizing my experiences, understanding what it meant to be in that positionality on this campus in the South. And was trying to figure out a way to express that in terms of my romantic opportunities on campus. And so, what Buffy, my professor, said is she was doing research in something called perceived partner availability, which is basically how a person perceives himself as having or not having available partners based on their environment, based on their positionality. And so we had worked for 3 years to look at what is the perceived partner availability for queer Black men on college campuses that are predominantly white. And instead of doing the research in a way that was just a written text, I actually did a script. And so we did do IRB. We looked at different measures. We compared measures. Specifically in psychology, and some measures that Dr. LA had created for perceived partner availability. We did a national research study with other queer Black men at predominantly white institutions. And then we took those narratives, as well as some techniques from theater of the oppressed, which are ways of doing theater that is connected to the book Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And thinking about how can we use those texts, how can we use those practices to tell stories, to convey the data. And so I worked on this script and then filmed the script with different students at Elon who identified as queer Black men, and then we presented that information at the end of my term to other students who were experiencing research and other faculty on staff. That experience was unique for me because the first time I thought about, oh, research, typically I think of a lot of statistics. I think of, very hard numbers, very kind of rigid space. But I really appreciated my professor, Dr. L.A. Buffy, as well as my theaters professors who encouraged me to think of space differently, to think of more possibility, to think of how can we use data, how can we push the boundaries of data, how can we communicate the results even in a different way that tell a story that encourages people to feel something. Something that my professors told me is that research is not just research, but it's research if it does something. It's research if it makes a change. How are we using research to do something? For me, the do something was through the arts. The do something was through theater. The do something was through storytelling. Um, and that created an experience for me that was extremely beneficial, but I think also showed other students different ways to engage in research, different ways of collecting data and sharing that data. The other thing that I did at Elon, I was a leadership fellow, which is a program that students come into during their freshman year and matriculate through all 4 years during your time at Elon. And at the very end of that time, you have to do something called a common good project, which is basically a project that you research during your senior seminar, and then you create some type of public facing opportunity from that research that impacts the common good of the students on campus. For my Common Good project, I created a leadership diversity training in the arts for musical theater students specifically. And I called it Empty Lids, and it was a multi seminar program with all of the different students in the musical theater department over a series of weeks. That program was really interesting because we also use those techniques of theater of the oppressed, pedagogy of the oppressed and collected data in real time with bodies. And so we used certain activities to do on-site activities that were getting quotes, value assessment, using bodies to move to get real-time data. And what that was able to do is show people physically how people were experiencing Elon, how they were experiencing the musical theater program from different identities. And then we're able to talk about those in real time. And so that program was really inspiring for me because as a musical theater student who is passionate about diversity in the arts, providing an opportunity for other people to engage in that conversation in ways that give them an activity as artists and a theater related activity, but also gives them a safe space to use the language that they do have, and that the results felt tangible, right? And so it's something when you see or you see somebody write a story about what they're experiencing, and it's something that you can relate with immediately, and then have a reaction that you say, well, what are we going to do to change that? And to see those changes come into fruition while I was still a student, and even in the years past, was extremely beneficial. And then the other experience that I'll talk about while I was at Elon was something called Music in the Village, which was a part of a larger program at Elon called the Village Project that worked with young students, elementary school age students in Alamance County to expose them to the arts. And so Music in the Village was a Saturday and Sunday volunteer program where we taught theater, dance, music, tap, jazz, all sorts of things. But during that time, the program was quite new. It didn't have a lot of people engaging with it. And so I worked with professors to create a survey, to create a study, to figure out, okay, what are things that we can get from the parents? A lot of those parents were Spanish speaking parents. And so we realized, oh, well, we need to have more access and opportunity for students who primarily speak Spanish. We need to have more students who are working and volunteering in the program who can communicate with those parents and communicate with the students. We should be offering classes that allow both the parents and the students to engage in the art. So it's collaborative together in more of a family activity. All of that came from research. All of that came from asking people questions differently and thinking about the work just a bit differently as well. So all of those experience at Elon, upon graduating, I was kind of like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. As a musical theater major, I was torn between traveling to New York, auditioning, being a performer. I was also torn between going immediately to graduate school, but I ultimately got a fellowship in DC at Arena Stage. Arena Stage is the nation's oldest regional theater. It's one of the first theaters to integrate both audience and stages. And at that time, 80 years ago, most of the theaters in DC, as well as across the country, particularly in the southern area of America, were segregated. And so you could not have audiences sitting in the same place. You couldn't have actors of different races on the same stages. And Arena was one of those stages that changed that. And so coming into this experience, coming into a theater that also was rested on kind of social justice, was really exciting for me. And the fellowship that I had was working primarily with schools. And so I was the community engagement fellow. And over the course of a year, I worked with students across DC to help do devised theater. One of the ensembles that I worked with particularly was called the Went Center Ensemble. And that was an ensemble made of students who had experienced some type of traumatic event. And so for devised theater, for those who don't know what devised theater is, it's when you take the stories of people, of yourselves, of groups, and you create theater, scenes, poetry, songs, dance based off of those experiences. And so, with this specific student body, it was a lot of communicating their real life experiences in order to create scenes and dialogue. Also got to work on all of the different shows of the season, creating writers' guides, creating guides for teachers and for students to better understand the different shows of the season, which was super exciting because as a person who loves theater, who doesn't want to just read plays for half the day or listen to musicals for half the day? And so that was a lot of my fellowship was hearing the different stories, hearing the different shows that were coming to the stage, and how do we communicate that to the needs of students and teachers across DC. After that fellowship, I went to the DC Arts and Humanities Education Collaborative, which was an organization or is an organization in DC that's primarily focused on providing access to in school and out of school education programs through the arts for students in DC and DC public schools. And so I managed a program called Office, which is Arts and Humanities for Every Student. And we basically worked with about 100 arts organizations in order to decide, what what field trip experiences are there lacking for students in DC? What are different opportunities that students might be able to support? We provided transportation. But one of the cool things that I got to do is reevaluate my experience with data science through my experiences at Elon. And so coming into this program office and coming into the DC Arts and Humanities Education Collaborative, one of the things that they were looking for was someone who could run their evaluation work. And having done evaluation through my Common Good project, having done undergraduate research, both of which focused a little bit on the arts and on diversity, they really wanted someone who could come and manage what is the equity evaluation that they could be doing for the DC Collaborative. How can we evaluate our students? How can we evaluate our teachers, parents, as well as the arts organization? And so I was able to actually land this job because of my experiences in undergrad and some of the work that I did at Arena Stage. As a part of that role, what I was able to do is was tasked with looking at the existing surveys, revamping them with a measure of equity, working with a group of other arts organizations, teaching artists, educators, the DC public school system to think of the questions that we need to be asking and also to expand the stakeholders that we were asking as well to get a fuller story of if our programs were successful, if they were effective in getting to the needs of the students. DC public and public charter schools serve primarily students of color, but a lot of the arts institutions at the time did not have programs that specifically related to students of color. And we had had some negative experiences with students and with teachers going to some of those institutions and not feeling included and not feeling like they belong. And so it was really cool over that year and through the COVID time is when I kind of got that role to figure out how are we able to talk with our stakeholders, talk with different arts organizations to create surveys to not just measure the teachers, but the students themselves. And thinking creatively about how we get to do that, right? And so we knew that elementary school students were not going to fill out a survey that was 20, pages long or 20 questions long. And so reducing it, thinking about how can we not even have just questions for those elementary school students. Do we want to use emojis? Do we want to use different write-in questions for them? Do we want to allow them to draw pictures to communicate how they feel? And the questions that we asked too that change for each different age group, as well as for our arts organizations and for the educators we're working with. So that experience led me to graduate school at Seattle University, where I got an MFA in arts leadership, and then also got a fellowship with the Association of Arts Administrators Educators, focusing on equity, diversity, and inclusion. While I was at Seattle University, my program was extremely cool. It had practicums where I got to work with different organizations in Seattle as well as in DC. But I got to do another project that was almost similar to my Common Good project, was my thesis. And as a very joyful person, and kind of thinking about my experiences through the arts, I decided to focus that thesis on joy and how joy is crucial to experiences in the arts, specifically in social impact. And so I got to create a definition of joy. I used a measure with the arts administrators of color. I used a measure with the Association of Arts Administrators in Education to figure out, okay, how are we measuring joy? How are we defining joy? And how can joy lead us to better social impact in the arts? And then after graduating, or soon after graduating, I joined the Kennedy Center on our social impact team. And the social impact team has been, for me, kind of the combination of all of those different things that I wanted to do. Focus in the arts, focus in administration, leadership, as well as some evaluation that's been really cool and dynamic. And so, want to talk a little bit now about some of the texts that I think have been really important for me. Some of these texts are things that was able to work with during my time at Seattle University and doing my master's thesis. Some of these texts were things that I've actually brought into my work at the Kennedy Center, into some of the conversations that we've had about doing research for social impact over the last 3 years. So joy. Joy is something that I think is extremely important to the work that we do. And the definition that I have for joy is kind of inspired by this text in the Bible that weeping may endure for the night, but joy comes in the morning. I always say that that text is challenging because even when it's dark outside, we know the sun is still shining. We know that there's still light. And that for me, joy is not neutral. Joy in a way is the promise of light. Joy is the promise that light is coming even when we can't see it. And so joy is how we act. Joy is how we react. Joy is how we exist, knowing that goodness is possible. That joy is not goodness alone, and that a lot of our experiences in the arts are derived from that, and that the idea that there is adjacent possible, that there is goodness, allows us to create the arts and allows us to use the arts as a vehicle for change. And so this text, Black Joy, Stories of Resistance, Resilience, and Restoration by Tracy Michelle Lewis Giggets, was one that I thought was very inspirational because it talks about joy in an interesting way, right? That the complexities of our experiences mean that our joy can live just underneath of our pain. It talks about using Black joy as a strategy, as a mechanism for resistance, as a method for resilience, and a master plan for restoration. And so thinking about this for my art, thinking about this for my research, she noted that Black bodies, we both carry joy and trauma in tandem as we navigate the world. Thinking about Black people experience the collective and individual trauma and grieving, we also have moments of collective and individual joy that spawns from darkness, that guide us to light, that our laughing, our dancing, our rest, our love for one another, our specific joy based strategies toward liberation and self compassion. This text for me made me realize joy is not just a strategy, but how can joy be used as a way to collect data? How can joy be used as a way to define the work that we get to do in the arts? Another text that I thought was really cool was this text by Miranda Fricker called Epistemic Injustice. And she talks about testimonial injustice, which is a distinctively epistemic injustice, a kind of injustice to which someone is is wronged specifically in her capacity as a knower. This topic can be a little confusing for some people at time. And so basically what testimonial injustice is saying is that uh, if I say this is who I am, you saying that is not, I don't believe you are who you say you are, essentially. And so a lot of times in the arts, a lot of times for communities who experience oppression, they face testimonial injustice of saying, this is who I say that I am, this is what I say that I do, but I'm wronged in the capacity for who I know I am because someone else who has a different position of power says that that is not that who you know you are is not who I know you to be, and that I will react on you based on who I know you to be, not on who you know yourself to be. And so that idea of knowing, of naming yourself, of framing yourself, I think is also really important in the way that we think about collecting data, in the way that we think about researching populations that have experienced depression. And that is something that we've also looped into our work in the arts. And then the last thing that I'll talk about before getting into a bit of my work at the Kennedy Center is this text by Linda Tuivai Smith called Decolonizing Methodologies. Linda Tuivai Smith is an indigenous researcher. And in that text, she talks about these different indigenous practices, right? And three of the ones that I've found very important to my work is loving, that it's important to do this work from a place of love. Healing, thinking of healing in a holistic way of connecting with folks. Again, thinking of that trauma and grief, the loss of land, she even talks about. And naming, which to me is actually very connected to testimonial injustice about having control over how you're naming yourself, who you are, naming the reality for your communities, naming the realities for what your future might be, having that captured in the language that is important to you, not the language that other people may be placing on you. And so, decolonizing methodologies, testimonial injustice, strategies of Black joy are all things that I learned during my time at Elon, all things that I studied during my time at Seattle University. That when it came time to come to the Kennedy Center, when I saw the definition for the work that we were doing, it became clear that these skills would be very important to support this new frontier of work at the nation's cultural center. So, what is social impact at the Kennedy Center? Some folks, let me just maybe start in frame of what the Kennedy Center is. So, the Kennedy Center is the nation's cultural center here in Washington, D.C. It is also the National Memorial for John F. Kennedy. And so, we have kind of a dual place, right? And so, have the nation's opera, the National Symphony Orchestra, the Washington National Opera. We also host something called the Kennedy Center Honors, which is one of the country's highest honors for arts legacy. But we produce shows a lot of time. People kind of just think of us as a venue for seeing classical music, seeing opera, seeing concerts, musical theater, straight plays. 5 years ago, the Kennedy Center decided to revamp its community engagement department and create something new called social impact. And so I want to read this definition because this is actually what we say at the start of every meeting with social impact to kind of frame who we are and what we do. But at the Kennedy Center, our systemic commitment to social impact lives in our belief that the arts hold a unique power in our society to build community, center joy, inspire action, and drive meaningful change. We leverage the arts for non-arts outcomes to advance justice and equity in all that we do. We do that through five, what we call pillars of work: artist empowerment, community empowerment, impact performance, cultural leadership, and reach activation. And the Reach is a new kind of campus at the Kennedy Center that has it's designed to be a community space. It is designed to be a place that reaches out to the community. Um, the social impact department is actually considered an artistic genre. And so we have the theater department, we've got jazz, we've got comedy, we've got dance, we've got hip hop, and then we have social impact. The difference is that dance is producing several ballet companies, modern dance companies that come and just do dance, right? Theater is having, Hamilton come, Legally Blonde, 25th Putnam County Spelling Bee, that producing theater for the sake of theater. The goal of social impact is explicit in the sense that we are interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, what I call culturally expansive. But a goal of our work is not just the arts for the art's sake, it's to think about what is the arts doing? How are the arts really being used as a tool? And some of the things that you'll see in here, centering joy, is something that really called out to me when I applied for this role. Inspiring action, advancing justice. Those are all things and tools that have been central to my work coming up to the Kennedy Center, and that this role has really allowed me to expand on. So as the Civic Alliances senior program manager, most of my work focuses on the community empowerment pillar. The community empowerment pillar, the way that I like to think of it is it's not community engagement. So there's nowhere in any of our language you would ever find the words community engagement. And that is intentional, right? So the way that we think of community engagement is kind of like, if I were to say, Amanda, here are 20 tickets to come see Hamilton, right? And we want you to, bring people from the organization to see Hamilton and just see a show that we're producing. That is kind of engagement for us. Empowerment is saying, Amanda, here are some spaces that we have. Here are some resources that we have. How can we work together to figure out a way to curate this space in a way that is powerful and meaningful to your community, in a way that we're doing work that I always say is in and with community and not to or for community. Through that work, we are able to build really strong relationships with our artists, really strong relationships with our community partners, as well as stretch and innovate the Kennedy Center in ways that have not been stretched or innovated before. One of our partners is a running club. We hosted the first 5K at the Kennedy Center in June. One of our partners is an organization that focuses on queer and trans youth in DC. We've done drag dress up. One of our community members or community partners is a bar in DC, DC's only Middle Eastern owned bar. We hosted an Arab cultural festival with them. We've done big festivals with indigenous community. And so it's a really cool opportunity for us to think about partners and ways that we can deeply engage with them and really allow them to feel empowered in the Kennedy Center and not engaged by the Kennedy Center. So I want to show just a little video that's an example of one of the programs that I work on called the Cartography Project. I'm actually supposed to be leaving to go to New Orleans tomorrow morning for the Cartography Project, but there's a hurricane there right now. And so as I'm watching this, I'll also be crossing my fingers that my flight does not get canceled and that I will arrive safely. But enjoy, and then we'll talk about this and how it's connected to our social impact report in just a second.
My name is Mark Bamuti Joseph. I'm the Vice President of Social Impact and the Artistic Director of Cultural Strategy at the Kennedy Center. And one of the architects of the cartography project.
Well, the first generation of the cartography project, it was done during the pandemic. So there was a lot of limitations there, and while it was successful, it did limit, I think, some of the composers and having to come to DC rather than being in their own element.
Seattle is such a big part of my creative identity. Someone deemed my music hologram funk.
I love the fact that things aren't congruent, because then that's how we shake things up. And I love shaking up the boat.
It's about stripping away what we think is our identity, or what we've been told is our identity, and then allowing something to be birthed out of that.
There's this one part in the cello, and for my mind, that is 100% influenced by tubas in New Orleans marching bands, because marching band here is like a giant thing, huge, right? Little kids start from this age, right? And so, but that's to your point of the Louis Armstrong. The music culture is so embedded. I can't help but put that into the music. So the cello is playing this very, to me, rhythmic thing, but all that is just something that I would hear in New Orleans, case closed. And the chords and stuff, all that little crunchy, it's just the sounds of the city, you know?
In social impact, we say our equity is our North Star. We talk about a culturally equitable future. Our desire isn't to mimic classical norms and put them in brown face or black face, or to put them in the bodies of black or brown musicianship. Diversifying the norms of classical music isn't just about minoritized bodies. It's, in this case, an inquiry as to what constitutes classicism.
So just to talk a little bit about what the Cartography Project is. So it's a program that's kind of one of the most complicated programs we do at the center. It's in partnership with the National Symphony Orchestra and Washington National Opera, where we've commissioned artists from across the country. It's about mapping Black dignity and mapping Black futures. That's where the word cartography comes from. And we're commissioning those composers and librettists to create new commissions, new orchestral commissions, new opera commissions about Black futures. And so we've been traveling to the focus cities of Houston, New Orleans, Detroit, and Seattle, working with community partners in that city, museums, the artists in that cities, the opera companies, the symphonies in that cities, to focus on how are we using the arts as a tool to talk about Black futures, to imagine what is a Black future in those cities, not Afrofuturism, which we love Afrofuturism, but a Black future in 20 years, a Black future in 30 years, in 50 years. And how are we imagining that and then creating opera, using symphony to tell a story about those ideas. And so this program is unique because it pulls together a lot of our different pillars. It pulls together community empowerment. It pulls together cultural leadership. It also pulls in impactful connections and artist empowerment. But it also pulls in a lot of our stakeholders, which I'll talk about in just a moment. The other thing that I'll say about this, because it kind of relates to what I'm talking about with our annual report in a minute, is that this is a program that when we first started, didn't go so well. All of the artists did not enjoy the program. All of them did not have a positive experience. All of them did not feel that the program lived up to what they thought the program was supposed to be. Which was, I think, hard for us to hear, right? As people who worked really hard on it, as people who really wanted the project to be successful, supportive, that they didn't get that full experience. After that, I came onto the team and joined our evaluation committee. We had been tasked by one of our donors to really measure what the work was that we were doing, to measure social impact, to say, how is it that this thing that you're talking about, systemic change, centering joy, creating a space of belonging and inclusion, how is that working? How is it actually happening? It was because of the research that we've done, the surveys that we've done, the data collection that we've done, that we were actually able to pivot this program in a way that has like exorbitantly created a place of belonging for these artists, the community groups that we work with.
My name is Mark Bamuti Joseph.
There we go. So last year, we came out with our first ever social impact report. This is something that was really 2-3 years in the making. And so we started doing this research in 2021, where we started evaluating our programs, right? Before then, social impact had not really evaluated how effective we were. We hadn't really been asked to, right? And we knew that if we were going to do this, that we couldn't just do a regular survey. And so most of the surveys that were at the Kennedy Center were primarily focused on, do audiences like the show? Is the food good in the dining hall? That was the basic premise of the research. We knew we had to take it a step further, right? Because the definition that we had created for ourselves in social impact was beyond just our people coming to the shows, our people enjoying the shows, that we weren't just asking audiences, but they were really asking a variety of stakeholders. And so we decided that we were going to do multiple surveys for multiple groups and use all of that information to inform our results. And so we were asking audiences, the people who do attend our performances, our artists and cultural leaders, the people who perform on our stages, our civic and community leaders, people who were organizations that supported and curated our stages, as well as the people who work at the Kennedy Center. And so for the cartography project, that was a lot of different people. And we have like 16 different programs we work with in social impact. And so getting all of those different elements and people to respond was a big task, but also thinking about what are we measuring? How are we going to measure? What is the thing that we're really asking them for? Because no one had really done the type of social impact evaluation work that we wanted to do. And so I worked with my evaluation team through the education department, and we started looking at measures at other institutions, ways that they were thinking of belonging, ways that they were thinking of inclusion if they were doing it in an effective way. And we actually adapted measures from a hospital that was trying to gauge whether its patients felt that the hospital was a welcoming place, that the hospital was a place of belonging. And we adapted that measure to fit what we thought might be effective for our staff members, might be effective for our community members, and our artists. So I want to, if I can figure out how to move this thing at the top, just show you what that annual report looks like. And I'll talk about just one of the measures with the time that we have left. So this is our report. And as you're scrolling through here, and I think the link to this was dropped in the chat for some of you to look at and study on your own. But it talks about all of our pillars, also includes some quotes, but it takes us through the different stakeholders that we have and some of those measures. And so our audiences, it talks about some of the performances that we've had, how many viewers we've had, a map of where our audiences are coming from, both across the country as well in DC. And then this is where things are kind of interesting. And so we did actually measure for belonging. And then we created a score for belonging on a few different measures. And so is the Kennedy Center an inclusive place? Do people feel like they were heard by the Kennedy Center? When they're at the Kennedy Center, do they feel like they're included? And then measured how that has changed year to year. This study just looks at the 2021 and 2022 results. The 2023 results are coming out in just a little bit, and they're really good. So I'm excited for folks to see that. So belonging is one thing that we measure. They were also measuring that, again, based on our different stakeholders. And so this is how we're measuring belonging for our community stakeholders, our audience members, and then we're also talking about empowerment. Again, that idea of we're not trying to engage folks, but do they feel empowered that this is a place that they have ownership over at the Kennedy Center? It's just a place where they feel like they have the resources, that they feel like they have the right and the ability to shape what the experience of the Kennedy Center is for the communities that are the most important to them. And so similarly, we looked at other measures also in the health field that we're studying, empowerment, and adapted those to speak to the work that we're doing at the Kennedy Center. And did that again for all of our various stakeholders across those different areas. My internet is taking a long time to load this, so I'm going to go back to my slides. But hopefully you all are able to load that and look at that in a great way. just focusing on belonging again. And so we created a definition for what we mean by belonging. And so this is something I think is really important. There are so many different ways to define inclusion, belonging, justice, even social impact, right? What we've thought through is saying, okay, if we're going to use the word belonging, if we're going to use the word empowerment, if we're going to use the term social impact, we need to measure it across how we're defining it. And so that's something that I think is really important because it's not necessarily institution to institution, right? So one institution may think of belonging or name social impact in a different way that we're naming and we're thinking about social impact. But it's helpful for us to keep us grounded in how we're defining that so then we can really measure the outcomes. And so things that we thought contributed to a sense of belonging, we're feeling welcome, that all backgrounds are welcome, that the staff was supportive and had responsiveness, that there was diversity in the programming and amongst the artists and community members, that the place was accessible for audience members with disabilities, and that the audience, the actors, the community members felt that their voice was heard, that they're through the artistic vision, ideas, and work, and through the artistic process. And so this shows you again just a little bit about how we measured belonging, right? So some of the items, and this is again that scale that I said was adapted again from the medical field. I'm having a hard time moving some of these things at the top of my page. There we go. So again, is the Kennedy Center an inclusive space? Do they feel heard at the Kennedy Center? Is the civic community process valued at the Kennedy Center? All these things are places where we've been questioning and been measuring for our different stakeholders. This one's specific to civic and community stakeholders, which are those community partners that I mentioned, like the bar or the running club. And the great thing about this survey is it allows us to make change happen immediately. And so the cartography project is a great example of that. When the artists told us that they did not feel that the Kennedy Center was maybe fully an inclusive place, or when they didn't feel that they were heard at the Kennedy Center, how did we then maybe shift the program to include that? How did we adapt our processes as staff, adapt our processes as an institution to say, okay, how do we make sure that our artists feel included? How do we make sure that folks feel that this is a place where they can show up fully as themselves, where they have the support that they've needed, and then shaping our programs to do that. That is why it's been great to see over the last years, all of those measures increase, our net promoter scores increase as well. So the thing that I'll leave you with just before we open up for questions is another text that is really important to me by Adrienne Maree Brown called Holding Change. And Adrienne Maree Brown says that practice is how we become what we long to be. And I think that's really important, that things don't just kind of happen, right? And in the world of the arts, we talk about rehearsal a lot, like we rehearse for our shows, we rehearse for the musicals, for the dance concerts, that if we want to be a place that is just, if we want to be a place that is inclusive, if we want to be a place that is joyful, that we have to practice that. That we have to practice what we want to be, the future that we want to have as an institution, as a community, as individuals. And that research and creating data opportunities is really important for that, that we have to be able to measure, is our practice getting incrementally better, right? And so when I was a dance student, and I was practicing my stretches, am I getting lower to the ground? Am I able to get lower? Am I able to get lower? Because I wanted to get those splits. I think helping us do research and evaluation is the one way for us to think about kind of us getting our splits. Like, are we getting incrementally better? Are we changing our processes? Are we taking the feedback from our artists, from our community members to make sure that we are creating a future that includes everybody, that a future that is going to include all of the people that we want to be a part of our whole story at the Kennedy Center? Uh, and that is all I have. And so I'd be happy to open up for any other questions or thoughts that people might have. And just thank you again for listening to kind of what we've been up to.
You've done an amazing job, Trey. Thank you. We are going to get started with the Q&A portion. This is our Easy Retro board, folks. And this is the template we use, the platform we use to add ideas, ask questions for our speakers. So you're just going to click on the plus sign in the relevant column and type your idea or your thought or your question. When you're finished, hit the blue box with the thin white check mark to save within the same field. And then your idea is going to appear on the screen for the public's reaction. You can also comment on other people's ideas using the thumbs up icon and using the quote bubble icon. You can add a comment on an actual idea if you prefer. All right, and with that, Trey, if you just want to go ahead and work through the questions, we will move them to the answered questions column at the end when you're ready.
Cool. I'm going to do this pink one first. So how do you leverage your work and social impact to attract funders? That is a great question. Because like I had mentioned, part of the reason why we did this study and started doing evaluation work in the arts is because one of our funders asked us to. They kind of said, hey, we're going to give y'all some money. We want to know why this work is important. We also want to know that you're making, again, that incremental change. And so for us, being able to tell the story of creating a space of belonging was really important, right? Because if you past 2020, a lot of folks had a real interest in supporting work in DEI, supporting work in social justice and the social impact space. But folks really want to know that it's working, right? And if you work in community space, if you work in the kind of social justice space, you know that change is not so quick and fast, that it is a little bit more incremental. And so for us, being able to tell the story of belonging, be able to really have a measure and a definition for it, a definition for inclusion, and then a measure for it, allows our funders to see that we're taking it seriously, that yes, we are creating a space that people feel connected, people feel like they belong, people feel like they are supported, but we have numbers to back that up, and we're not just telling stories. A lot of nonprofits, a lot of organizations fall into just storytelling, and storytelling is great. We love storytelling, but how are those stories connected to actual change? And that is something that funders are incredibly interested in. And so if there's a way that you can connect your stories to numbers, a way that you connect your change to actually a chart, it'll actually be able to make funders take a little peek at you a bit more and say, oh, this is an organization that's serious about not just making sure people belong, but measuring that belonging is important. All right. Looking at this blue pile, do arts administration students need data science training to be competitive in the job market? Need is, I think, a strong word. But I will say a lot of arts organizations are creating departments like mine, social impact departments, community engagement departments, and that I have yet to have a job after graduating where I have not been tasked with that evaluation and research work at my institution. When I was an undergraduate student studying musical theater and arts administration, that is not something I would have ever imagined, that I'd be leaving college and that every job I've had since college, my role, because of my experience in data science and undergrad, would help me get those jobs. And I'd be tasked with advancing that work for large institutions like the Kennedy Center. So I wouldn't say it's a need, but I will say that it's helpful because those skills are not as common for arts administration students, for students in the arts in general. And so if you're able to take some courses, even if you're not able to take courses, but talk with professors directly, go to seminars like this, connect with other organizations and departments across your institution, that I think it will be helpful. Because even if you can speak to it a little bit, a lot of folks in the arts don't get that experience, and it'll be really valuable for you. Okay, is it your experience that data science tools are being used widely in nonprofit arts sector, or is that happening mainly at well-funded organizations? Oh, this is a great question. So what I'm about to say is insane. At the Kennedy Center, my department not just my department, my sub-department within my department has a budget of about $1 million. The organization that I worked at before the Kennedy Center, the whole organization had a budget less than half of that. What is connected between that smaller organization and the much larger organization of the Kennedy Center? They both had platforms dedicated to data science. They both had platforms that were related to conveying their stories, again, of belonging and inclusion in the arts, of how are they using the arts, how are they measuring if people feel that they belong, how are they tracing their audiences. both had set aside budgets to support that directed. So it is not just well-funded organizations that are doing that data science work. A lot of smaller organizations are able to get funding for capacity building, which I believe data science does fall under, and get grant funding to be able to do some of that work, especially if you're serving a large number of stakeholders. And so that smaller organization that I worked with that had, half the budget of just my budget for my team, worked with significantly more stakeholders than I do at the Kennedy Center. And so it was equally as important for them to really measure the impact that they were having on, again, students, institutions, teachers, as it was for the Kennedy Center to measure the work they were doing on social impact. And so I do think it's being more widely used now. Even the smaller organization that I worked with was ahead of the Kennedy Center in terms of its data science tools than we were on the social impact team. And again, they were not as well funded as we were. And so I think if you're able to reach out to organizations and figure out what tools exist, even creating your own tools, being able to convey that message is helpful for all arts organizations in the nonprofit sector. All right, heading into this green pile, is the market really tough for international students? It depends. It really depends. So one of the things that we've been able to do at the Kennedy Center is we have a lot of fellowships, and a lot of the fellows that we have worked with are international students. I think I've had 3 international fellows since I started my time at the Kennedy Center. I've had international students who I supervised working at the DC Collaborative. A lot of it is just really finding those opportunities that can give you some of those tools. And a lot of those tools are open to folks no matter the nationality. And so international students, even students who are domestically, can benefit from the learning. The one international fellow that I had most recently came to the Kennedy Center, not even really to stay in America, but she's inspired by doing work to support orchestras in Costa Rica. And so she came to the Kennedy Center to get some of the tools with the intentions of bringing it back to the country that she knows and love. And so that is not necessarily something that is super tough, but again, depends on the experiences. Amanda, was that my last question, or do I get one more?
I will let you have one more question.
Okay, let me see which one's. As an English and theater major, I'm intimidated by data science. What courses should I take to ease me into the field? Great question. So I mentioned that I had a bunch of majors and minors at Elon. The courses that I thought were super helpful, my psychology courses were super helpful, especially for a theater major, because a lot of the measures that I have done, used for the data science and the Kennedy Center and other institutions came from psychology classes. Statistics was also a really great class. I took 2 statistics classes while I was at Elon, just because I think that is also being able, important to be able to read stats, important to be able to create them. Data visualization is also becoming huge across all institutions. The arts, I feel like, are really just getting into the data visualization realm, but statistics is really helpful for that and being able to really understand the numbers that you're working with. And so psychology, statistics, I think are both incredible. Also history. Some of the measures that I've used, as I named in my positionality, are not necessarily measures that people may always think to use, right? So thinking of indigenous methodologies, thinking of methodologies that come from Black authors, from queer authors, queer theory, intersectionality. All of those things are tools that we can also use in data science, right? Like we get to be, and we get to decide how we tell our story. We don't get to tell this, the story doesn't tell us. And so really embrace all of that is out there in your institution. Feel free to reach out to me too. I know my email was in the chat. I am so open to meeting with folks, having conversations, having coffee, telling you a bit more about my experience and helping you get plugged in wherever is possible, because the field needs you and we need you, and excited to have any help to bring you in. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Trey.